I am recording. All right.
Excellent. So we are working on our last session, which is sort of a double session um, on the last two sort of large reading assignments of the City of God, Augustine City of God.
hmm
You want to take the lead?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
so I think I'm going to kind of give my overall thoughts and then
Okay.
summarize kind of what the different books we read were about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so, well, I guess, okay, so I guess first the two main chapters we read were 14 and then 20, and we also read a little bit
Mm-hmm.
of 15, 21, and 22. And
Correct.
book 14 focused a lot on the fall of man and kind of this dividing factor between living in flesh and living in spirit.
Right.
And chapter 20 really focused on the the end times, or the resurrections and the
Right.
separation between the city of God and the city of man.
Right.
So yeah, I think so. You had mentioned this before
Mm-hmm.
when we were talking, and is like you didn't think we were going to get out of this book what you thought you were going to get, and
Correct.
that meaning like you were kind of expecting maybe more of like what the city of God should look like from maybe a
Mm-hmm.
governing standpoint or like
Mm-hmm.
a moral standpoint,
Sure.
and like how we can act and live now. But
Mm-hmm.
instead, we're kind of getting that the city of God isn't something that we're necessarily living in right now, and it's something that is
Yeah.
in the future. And yeah, so it's not like a guiding force of how to govern right now from like a political
Right.
perspective, but more of like
Correct.
definitely more of the religious perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, we can go into different topics. I think,
Well, let me ask you this,
yeah.
if if I can jump in. What what do you how do you respond to that? That it seems to be sort of lacking a, a theory of governing that we saw in Plato and Aristotle. So what do you make of that? Is that like you can make anything of it,
hmm
but how does that sit well with you? Do you wish he had done X, Y, and Z on the here and now? Can he not do that because of the duality of these two cities? You know what I'm saying?
hmm
Like how do you?
I mean, I think he did what he set out to do
Sure.
in describing, you know, describing the differences between both of them and the
Hmm.
natures of them. Um, and I do think um, they're definitely guiding things for an individual. I just don't think that they're there for
Yeah.
a government at large.
Yeah.
So the book isn't really focused on like a it's not really focused on a body of people or like the entire earth. Rather, it's kind of focused on
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
one person can do for themselves in this regard.
Hmm.
So I think he succeeded in doing that, um,
Yeah.
and I don't have like a problem with that
Sure.
necessarily. Like I
Sure.
think so.
Exactly.
Like I think when it comes to government, it's really hard to say like to prescribe a way to live. And
Hmm.
from what we had in Aristotle and what we had in Plato, it's like they came up with these pretty specific scenarios and how to deal with those
Hmm.
scenarios. Like, oh, we make the
Hmm.
assumption that everyone lives as efficiently as possible, or
Yeah.
things like that. And you can do that, but what St. Augustine is kind of focusing on is like, well, this is real life, and
Yeah.
if we're focusing on all of these truths, then this is how we should respond as an individual. Kind of what the general population does isn't something we have that much control over, I guess.
Sure. No, I agree. And the other thing too is that you know, in the history of philosophy in general, and also in the history of political philosophy, you have grand theorists,
hmm
or you can say sort of generalists, or very general like theories, and then you have particularists, right? So you have like, so clearly Plato and Aristotle fall into the grand theory element. And maybe we can even say Plato a little bit more because we really get a sense of what his ideal regime would look like. Um, but there are, but for instance, when we go to Machiavelli next, I mean, we're not going to get a theory. We're not going to get a utopia. We're not going to get a grand theory
Hmm.
of a political regime. Rather, we're going to be getting sort of how he thinks, in particular, the ruler ought to rule.
Hmm.
So that's going to be, so you're looking at a piece of the sort of city or the piece of political theory as opposed to it in its entirety. Same thing could be said with Augustine as well, that he's not setting out at all to develop a grand theory of
Hmm.
sort of the ideal politics or the ideal regime. I mean, he doesn't really need to, because even at the end, as you saw in 22, I mean, he's been described. It's almost indescribable, right? We don't even really know what that heavenly city will be like,
Yep.
because we're thinking about it through sort of our fallen frame of mind and perception, and we can get some sense of it, right?
Hmm.
So you're absolutely right. It's sort of like the the focus is on the origin, nature, and end of these two cities. And also, too, I would add, he's not really developing the theory, right? I mean, he
Right.
believes in divine revelation, so the divine revelation comes to him, as it were, through Scripture, and he is helping us sort of understand it,
Hmm.
and also the plight that we're in. So, um, so on all those marks, because Plato and Aristotle, we don't have the divine revelation component,
Right.
right? So they really are thinking up their theories from scratch, as it were,
Hmm.
And Augustine doesn't need to do that. Um, I did think in 14, I thought what was interesting was the this this living by the flesh versus living by the spirit as distinctive aspects of the cities, right?
Hmm.
Um, and, um, and sort of like further clarifying that, because he goes on this whole riff about flesh, right? That flesh is not evil in itself,
Yep.
which we talked about with his theory of evil before, right? All material is going to be good because God created it.
Hmm.
But then he sort of clarifies what sort of living by the rule of flesh means, which is ultimately living according to the self,
Hmm.
or if you will, man's standards versus God's standards. And I thought that was a helpful sort of like distinguishing component, you know. In the city of God, it's all Godward, as it were,
Hmm.
focused on God, which brings up a whole array of traits, such as humility and love and worship, right?
Yeah.
Selflessness, and then the flip side, is going to be all these vices, as it were, um, which he outlines sort of at one point, like fornication, impurity, lust, etc. But what it's funny with in 14, I realized, and I think it's elsewhere too, but in 14 I realized, like, he uses the language again of like pilgrimage.
Hmm.
I mean, in other words, it's very difficult to sort of develop a theory of the state in the here and now. If we are pilgrims on the way, we're passing through this world, we're passing through this sort of fallen um, state with fallen people and a fallen creation, right?
Yeah.
We're moving through it, um, and yeah, it's sort of another element about yeah, you just can't like sort of put your finger on what would be ideal here. You're moving through this, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so I thought it was, yeah, I thought 14 really helped clarify then the distinctions. um, between the cities, and also too he utilizes that language, right, of the cities proper,
Yes.
um, which um, is helpful as we're doing political theory, and political philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, at some point I want to get to some other things that come up later, but did
In
you have anything
14.
you wanted to add to? Well, just later in this whole chunk of reading
Hmm.
that we've done, other books as well. But did you have anything else on that? The sort of the distinctive traits, flesh versus spirit,
Um,
self.
yeah, I mean, it's actually, I mean, something that me and my friends were kind of talking about recently. Um,
Mm-hmm,
how you can kind of track any sin back to a selfish desire.
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
like any sin that's enumerated in the Bible, it can be tracked back to selfish desire.
Yeah,
Which is interesting because even what you might consider someone being selfless, like if you
right.
consider someone being selfless but not towards like in a godly fashion, there's still
Mm-hmm,
selfishness in that. Like um, you can track it, down because they're going to have some reason of being selfless that is not focused on uh, on a godly with a godly intention,
sure.
which is definitely interesting because it's like, okay, so people who are of the flesh can have traits that are attributed with the city of God, but those traits might not be with the right intentions. And I think he
Mm-hmm,
makes kind of this, like he made this distinction of it's not the flesh that causes sin, or sin is not caused by the
mm-hmm.
flesh, but by the a
Yeah, I
soul.
like that distinction. I really like that.
Yeah, and it's like um that kind of also parallels with intention because it's like actions, like like something makes me think of this. It's not Kantian, right?
Mm-hmm,
Actions are not wrong just because of like in and of themselves. They're wrong
right.
because of the context, because of the environment that they're done in, or the reasons
Mm-hmm.
behind their doing. So there's definitely the difference between what is actually there and then the intent behind it that I really like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. I mean, like the I think there's a couple things going on with this notion of the flesh. One is flesh being matter being created by a good God is itself intrinsically good, right?
Hmm.
So flesh can't be bad. And then he adds that even sort of the way of the flesh, as it were, or choices according to the way of the flesh are actually seated within the soul,
Hmm.
right? They come from the soul, sort of first, you know.
Yes.
Um, and even some of the sins that are sort of outlined. I mean, obviously, fornication, impurity is a little vague for me, but fornication would be obvious. Drunkenness would be obvious. But even some of the other ones too, like sorcery, right? Um, not you can. I mean, how is that sort of like the flesh, as in our bodies, right? And it doesn't seem to sort of follow that logic because flesh for him is sort of a broader notion,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's not only like physical acts, it's also
yeah, exactly,
mental
exactly.
acts.
Yeah, right. Well, pride, right?
Yep.
Pride wouldn't be like wouldn't be rooted in physical pleasure necessarily. Sometimes it can lead to that or be connected with it,
Sure.
um, but that's certainly much more, I would say, of a psychological state than sort of a physical state.
Hmm. Definitely.
I mean, I will say one thing that was really interesting just throughout the whole book is this notion of like he gives a real full descriptive account of not only like fallen man, but sort of the psychology of fallen man, right?
Hmm.
Um, which I think ends up affecting sort of the interactions then that we all have with each other, right?
Hmm.
So in other words, like um, you know, Augustine gets sort of credited with really focusing on psyche, what's going on within, our minds, our intentions, etc. I mean, obviously, at bedrock is as you push it, as you take the layers off, it's going to be ultimately sort of, well, we are ultimately something good, but fallen.
Right.
But that fallen element is really strong as you peel back the layers of your intention or will. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be you're going to be rocked by it, and it's going to determine a lot. Um, so that is was very interesting to see him elucidate sort of the mind of man.
Yeah. Um,
If you got something, go with it, because I'm going to have to bring up sort of the elephant in the room.
yep. So there
If
was this one bit
you,
before that in chapter 14, um, about Stoics and like wisdom.
yeah,
Um, how like certain pleasures which are good are like need to be avoided or should be avoided. Like if they're avoided, then it results in wisdom, kind of a thing.
hmm hmm
Um, let's see. I'm trying to find the exact
what
spot.
section is this?
I think
I mean, I
like
remember
chapter
reading it.
8 is when he talks about it.
Okay. Chapter 8 or book 8? Oh,
Uh,
chapter.
yeah, chapter 8
Sorry.
of book 14.
Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, 'cause he does this, he brings up some of the philosophers, right? Even Plato.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think, yeah, 2, right? Well, I see it in 2, at least the start of it. Um,
Right.
so you've got the Epicurean philosophers, and so with the Epicurean philosophy, they basically make a distinction between pleasure and pain. Uh, so, or that's their sort of foundation. Pleasure good, pain bad. But pleasure in the Epicurean tradition is not just the hedonistic pleasures. Pleasure can also be defined as the absence of pain. So if you think about that, the hedonistic form would be eat, drink, and be merry, right? Ad infinitum.
Hmm.
But the Epicurean notion is not really that, because eating, drinking, and being merry ad infinitum can actually end up hurting you, right? Drunkenness, being
Hmm.
hungover, overweight, health problems. So they had sort of an interesting notion there. So like, yes, pleasure is important. Pleasure is sort of the summum bonum, but at the same point, pleasure as defined as the absence of pain.
Hmm.
So that's that's one sort of qualification. I mean,
That
obviously, I think he's, yeah,
I was gonna say that seems uh, very Aristotelian from an ethics point of view, right? Like
yeah,
it's definitely not at either extreme. Like avoid the bad
yeah,
things. Don't indulge too much in the good things.
sure, exactly. I think that's what it would lead to,
Hmm.
and it could very well lead to sort of like a sort of a simple life or a simple existence, um, uh, with this minimum element of pleasure.
Right.
You
Hmm.
know, like whatever. In other words, yeah, you don't want too much sort of anything, because it can end up harming you. So, or end up leading you to pain. So, sort of moderate your pleasures, or simple pleasures,
Hmm.
minimal pleasures. And in the Stoics, in the section, he's like, on the other hand, it may be supposed that the Stoics live by the rule over the spirit. So now we're going back to this distinction of flesh versus spirit, because they place man's highest good in the mind. What's in man's mind but spirit? But in fact, both these groups live by the rule of the flesh, as divine scripture uses the expression. Um, so I think the notion here, did they bring it up again in 8, the Stoics?
Yes, he does.
After he said some positive things about Plato, right?
Yes.
Um, Yeah, so just Stoicism in general then is going to be really essentially not. I mean, it's not being bothered, having a very still mind, not being bothered or overly excited about uh, sort of X, Y, and Z, whether
Hmm.
it be an external event or an internal event, um, but to accept your fate with resolve. Um, so, I mean, I'm sort of thinking that what makes this uh, living by the standard of the flesh is not the obvious things like hedonistic pleasures, right? But that ultimately doesn't have the God component as a part of it.
Hmm.
It doesn't have the selfless component, the uh, whatever. It might be commendable,
Right.
but right, but it's still lacking whatever. It's still lacking Christ. It's still lacking a Christian living, um, even if it has pieces that we might say, hey, that's actually pretty good. Not to be overly bothered by stuff you have no control about.
Right.
Um, the Stoics do that on death too, right? There surely should be no fear as it relates to death because there's nothing you can do about it. And also, from what they know, um, death is just non-existence. So why ultimately be afraid about something about your non-existence? You won't be there. There'll be nothing there to experience your non-existence.
Hmm.
Um, so, um, so yeah. Did you want to add more on that?
I think I'm fine with that.
Okay. I think the elephant in the room
Yep.
is going to be predestination,
Hmm.
because he brings it up. He seen a couple things to know. So Augustine's really an interesting figure in the whatever the history of theology, because he is historically Catholic. There were heretical groups prior to him and during his time, in which other works that he writes are actually against those heresies. But you don't have Protestants until the 1500s, right?
Right.
With Martin Luther, etc. So the reason I bring that up is that um, predestination. I mean, obviously there are notions of it in Paul. You find it in Augustine, but it gets really ramped up with John Calvin during the Protestant Reformation and his theology, playing up the ultimate sovereignty of God, the ultimate powerlessness of the creature or the human,
Hmm.
and therefore the need for this sovereign act of God to sort of pull them in, or to regenerate them, regenerate the elect, as it were. So and actually, I remember growing up within the Reformed tradition, looking back, a lot of people would point to Augustine as sort of being a friend, as it were,
Hmm.
an early friend to Reformed theology. But what's interesting, I mean, one, I'm just going to going to want to get your take on predestination, but uh, I think it has interesting implications as it relates to what he's getting at politically in the book. So we can take these in two pieces. What, well, maybe even three. What was your understanding of his notion of predestination?
Hmm. Um, it's a good question.
I mean, you at least
So,
are familiar, like you came across those. I mean,
yeah.
we don't necessarily need to point to them, but you heard the language, read the language, seemed pretty much leaning in that direction, right?
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of how he presents it, I guess, is that God knows the people who are going to be in the city of God
Hmm.
already, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's even a spot where it says that he chose them, and I
Hmm.
believe it said he chose them. Hold on, I think he said through grace or by grace,
Right.
and not of. Hold on, where's that? Not of like any other, uh, not based on another factor.
Right. Right.
Let's see, where was that? I wish there was an easier way to search.
Yeah. Right. Um, I'm gonna try and I'm gonna do the harder way of searching.
Hmm.
Well, here's one. book 20, section 8, or chapter 8,
Yep.
about 4 lines down. For he will never seduce, oh, he's talking about the devil. He will never seduce that church which was predestined and chosen before the foundation of the world. Chosen seems very like specific in terms of how the predestined was worked out, right?
Hmm.
Um, even the next, well, in my book, the next page is still an 8. It may be tricky to find. It's still talking about the devil. They will not belong. They will not be people belonging to the predestined number of the sons of God. Um,
Ah, yeah.
so it's sprinkled throughout, and Augustine doesn't mince words. So um,
Right. Um, One thing that's interesting is so he talks about the two resurrections
mhm,
and this period,
mhm.
this metaphorical period of 1,000 years where
Sure. Oh
the
my gosh,
devil
he goes
is
into that.
restricted. Like he says it's not literal in the way that it's pronounced. So
Right.
he says it's not literally 1,000 years, and it's not literally that he has no power. Um,
Right.
but he's restricted in what he's able to do.
Mhm,
And it also, I think it also says that, well, right in that section before where you're reading,
mhm.
um, let's see, this verse seems to compel us to believe that during that time, short as it is, no one will be added to the Christian community, but that the devil will make war with those who have previously become Christians.
Mhm.
Um, which is interesting because that kind of language
Right.
makes it seem like there, people can be added to the community over time,
Yeah.
whereas the predestination is kind of a an eternal perspective where it doesn't,
Sure.
it's not bound to time at all. Not to
Hmm.
say that it's
Hmm.
necessarily before time, because again,
Yeah.
Augustine has some interesting ideas about
Issues
time.
about before time. Yeah.
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 Um, so yeah, kind of how that plays into it is going to be interesting. Like you can't like if you say that predestination happened before time, then that's definitely
Hmm.
like not a good way to think about it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
it's more it's it's happening outside of time,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
which is just really it's really difficult for people to understand because we're so bound by it.
Yeah.
Um, there's also, so I don't know if he
So
necessarily,
let me follow something. Would you
sure.
say that, would, would, into saying that, are you getting at the idea that, so the whole idea of like before time,
Hmm.
how does that impact whether or not God has chosen a group for the heavenly city and chosen a group for the earthly city? So the before time, right?
Yep.
Because the predestined notion has this component, right? It's like the he's not just sort of it's not just foreknowledge. Foreknowledge is I can see in advance
Hmm.
who's going to become a Christian, who's not. But it really seems like the human is pretty passive, and God is very active in
Yep.
the choosing.
Sure. So you're
Right?
asking how I see it?
Well, how does that impact the before time? God's still doing the choosing.
Yes, I don't disagree with
Okay.
that.
Okay. Okay. Now, with that said, then we face some issues. Okay.
Hmm.
And the one issue is, um, so if you're in the heavenly city, or if you are in the earthly city, and if you are predestined to be in either one of these, okay, um, what, how to put this? What, all right, let me take it back. There's a lot of language about how if you will, the earthly city or within our fallen state, God utilizes that to punish the wicked and to uh, refine, excuse me, or test, as it were, um, uh, the righteous, right?
Hmm.
And we can find examples. We can find scriptural examples of that as well. But that comes up, like in other words, this happened because they were being punished by God, or this happened because they were being tested by God. Similar to Abraham. So the point is, I guess what I'm asking is, what's the purpose then of if it's already predestined, right?
Hmm.
Um, what's the purpose of being um, uh, like, all right, ready? I'm already going to be in the heavenly city. This has already been determined. Why am I going through these tests? Why am I going through these challenges if, in fact, the end result is I'm going to end up in the heavenly city? If it is the case that I'm going to be ending up in the earthly city and ultimately in hell, why am I getting? It's like we're getting like a double punishment, right? So I'm getting some punishments in the here and now. Not everyone, because he does say sometimes people will be successful in the here and now, yet their lot is clear in the future. So my point is, like, if you have these elements of you're already predestined to one city or the other, and this is maybe more relevant to the righteous, why the challenges? Why the tests in the here and now, even maybe through the earthly city,
Hmm.
right? I mean, like, for instance, he's getting a big test, sack of Rome. The Christian community is getting criticized, for the sack. One could see it as a type of challenge. What's the purpose of uh, God testing the faithful if, in fact, they're going to just end up in that city anyway?
Sure. So, I mean, ultimately, I don't think it's possible for us to know the actual answer, but I think we can
Okay.
speculate some things.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I think there's an aspect of character building
Mm-hmm.
of the Christian people. Like, we go through
Right.
trials and we come out better through each trial. And we come out with growth, right? We come out
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
more, like, producing more fruits of the Spirit, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and maybe that's necessary for us. I
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe that's just good for us, and something that we
Right.
wouldn't necessarily get if we skipped this whole life on Earth. There's also there's also kind of this aspect where it's like it tells a good story. I don't like I don't know
Right.
how to describe it other than kind of saying that like it tells a good story. Like um
Mhm.
it's really hard for us to know the like to see the forest aside from the trees because we live in the trees.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like there are so many things that are like connected in this world and ways that they interact that it's just hard for us to understand how they interact.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like I don't know. So again, I'm gonna say some things that are just totally kind of in my mind, maybe metaphorical.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but I kind of think about the world as like a giant computer program, and
Mhm.
God is kind of the person who wrote that program, and
Right.
he is he's guiding the program to the way that he wants it to be in the end, right? He's not
Mhm.
just simply taking the things out and deleting them. He's letting people have their free will, right?
Right.
And you might argue it's like, oh well, why did he choose some people to be predestined one
Sure.
way or another way?
Right.
Um,
Right.
that's a good question. Um,
Right.
like from a programmer's perspective, why do like if you say for example you had a random number generator and it's like some
Right.
things ended up one way, some things ended up another way, right? Like genetics
Mhm.
decided something about a person.
Mhm.
There's like this there's an essence to a person that exists beyond all of time, and
Mhm.
that essence, like some of those essences happen to align with this godly city and some of them don't. And why that was chosen, I don't know if we have the answer for, but that it was chosen,
Right.
like I think that's kind of a fact of the matter that it was chosen. Um,
Right.
so yeah, like I definitely think that there's like this high level overview of the world that's really difficult for us to see. Like it's hard for us to see how certain
Yeah.
trials like I think in our lives we can understand that goodness comes from trials.
Right.
It can also be like there are trials where you cannot see the end of it until it comes.
Mhm.
And you don't know that there's goodness coming out of it until it comes.
Right.
And that's a thing that you can build up over time is like trying to find what like what is the purpose of this, even if it's not to benefit your own life but to benefit someone else's.
Sure. No, and one of the things is uh, growth, spiritual growth,
Yeah. Mhm.
because the idea. I mean, even within Reformed theology, there's this notion, right? Or justification basically puts you right with God, and then sanctification is this process of being made holy,
Mhm.
which is a process, right?
Yes.
Ultimately something done by the Holy Spirit. And according to Reformed theology, the human individual has very little role in it.
Mhm.
But you could also match that with um, Augustine in the sense that, so as you were talking, I was wondering whether or not he has where his notion or where the notion of um, purgatory was, because I know it's you don't find it in the earliest forms of Christian theology, but you do find it at some point, right?
Right.
You certainly get it in the Middle Ages at some point. So um, that also is developmental. It's a process, right? This whole idea of like you die, and then whatever those, I guess, if it was Augustine, if they're elect or whatever it might be, would be going into purgatory with the idea that's basically the sanctification process. Like you can't get to heaven unless you're fully scrubbed, you know,
Mhm.
and you're clean. So there's like, I'd be curious what his theory is on purgatory, then matched with his theory on predestination. Also, too, what's interesting is that within the Catholic tradition, so the body of Catholic theology will reject this notion of sort of the reformed notion of predestination. Okay, that the human actually does have some freedom in their ultimate lot in the afterlife, but they still accept Augustine. So there would be this question of, you know what I'm saying, like how do you square some of these things together?
Mhm.
You know,
Sure.
just 1 second.
Yep.
Olivia, come here. in your so that would be another thing to sort of like, yeah, figure out, because there's some tension there, and then there's the overall question about sort of fairness. Like, to what degree is this
Yeah,
fair if I am
but like,
ultimately, allotted to damnation, which, according to the story, is eternal?
yeah,
There's no escape hatchet, perhaps.
yeah, but like,
Um,
I don't like the fairness argument because it's like,
yeah,
who's to say that God needs to be fair? Like, he's not fair,
right, right,
right? Like, where does this idea of fairness even come from? That people should be
sure,
treated uh, the same in like every way? I don't know.
right.
Like,
But if
if you don't have
but
the
yeah,
opposition, then you don't
mhm,
like. Then it's not a blessing to be in the city of God,
right,
right? Like, if there's no
right,
opposite end, then there like if you don't have evil, then you don't have good to a degree.
hmm hmm yeah. I mean, the flip side of it, if you look at the narrative, like you were bringing up sort of the story component before, is that you really have, I mean, another way of looking at it is that you have this, I mean, other than working from sort of God's design, you have this major um, segment of reality
Yeah.
that doesn't have that original goodness. In other words, you have damnation. You like, whatever, the devil and the demons are still existing, as well as the damned souls
Hmm.
forever. And there's something that's sort of looked at from a story perspective that's not full, and I mean full redemption, right?
Right.
Which leads some people to the notion of a full redemption. That ultimately all will be renewed, um, even the darkest parts, you
Hmm.
know, of creation. Let me close with this question. What what do you take from the three that we've read this far? I know it's a big question, but we can have some concluding thoughts on that.
Hmm.
Plato, Aristotle, Augustine.
Um. Okay. What do I take away? So I've mentioned before. So Plato, I really like his thought process. I learned a lot about how
Mm-hmm.
he breaks down arguments.
Right,
Um,
Socratic method.
the Socratic method. I really like his way of approaching things. I think I learned a lot from his like theory of things and the intelligible versus the real, and also his ideas of government. I think I've kind of
Mm-hmm.
right, like we've talked about how I've kind of fit that in with things I already know. Um,
Right.
from Aristotle, I think one of the primary takeaways was the idea that humans are political beings, or is that the word?
Mm-hmm.
Was that the word? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Political
political
animals. Mm-hmm.
political animals.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it kind of gives you more of a reason as to why we gather together and why we form communities.
Yeah.
So I think that aspect was definitely helpful. And then from Saint Augustine, um, there, let's see, it definitely ties in a lot of the religious components,
Right.
and brings those together in a more kind of, I guess, formal way.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
it makes kind of direct connections between things the Bible says and more like logical thought processes.
Sure. Sure.
And yeah, like I said, the other two works kind of focus on government or policies at a larger scale, and this kind of focuses on the duty of the individual.
Yeah. Perfect. No, that's good. That's good.
Hmm.
We move on to Machiavelli. So, if you will, we will be moving on to someone who is clearly living by the standard of the
Okay.
flesh. Did you get your book, by the way?
Not yet.
Okay, it should arrive today.
Okay.
I ordered it.
Cool.
So, excellent. Good.
Yes.
Good talk. And yeah, Machiavelli will add sort of a whole new element to the discussion,
Cool.
and will be very interesting to read after Augustine. Very.
Okay.
So, and given whatever you know about Machiavelli, you probably
Not
are
much, I'll
getting a
tell
sense
you.
of.
So,
Okay, okay. Well, it'll be a very interesting read,
okay.
yeah, yeah. So
Cool.
awesome, dude.
Looking forward to it.